All right. Well, thank you all for being here with me today. Jessica, I wanted to start with you. You were named Sweden's most innovative leader in 2019 after leading a digital transformation for STS Education. Just a few months ago in March, you said that the experience had given you a lot of insight into what it means to lead through disruption and change. Since early March, when you said that, disruption and change have sort of become the norm. I'm curious if you can share some insights into how the experience has informed how you're handling the crisis now, and what insights and advice you can share from that experience.
Yeah, I think this award with Sweden's most innovative leaders. It's interesting because I think it's a different thing. There's a difference between being an innovator and being an innovative leader. And for me, being an innovative leader means that you're looking at the people that you're leading and trying to unlock things in them that make it possible for them to drive innovation. So to me, there's a fundamental difference there. And I think that leading innovation has to do with unlocking creativity in people, and leading through chaos and change has to do with also unlocking creativity in people. And for both of those things, I think that psychological safety is required among the people that you lead. So I would say that that's one of the main connections that I would do between leading innovation and being an innovative leader and leading through chaos.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of psychological safety, Eric, as the CEO of two publications, you kind of sit on that border between art and commerce. And in times of crisis, how do you ensure that the disruption happening on the commerce side doesn't ultimately negatively impact the end product, the art?
Well, Jared, you're right. That's a good question for a media company when so many of our peers are having to lay off staff. And I think it's difficult to devote as much as you'd like to the art side of the equation when 30% of your people are gone. For us, we are graced with an owner who is going to support us through this and is dedicated entirely to excellence on the part of our company. I think that what you need to do is remember why you're here. Remember what your business is. Rededicate yourself to that. And excellence and usefulness to our readers is really what we're about at Inc. and Fast Company. It's a good way to keep the company focused, to keep the team focused when everything around you is in turmoil.
Mm-hmm. Mark, nobody was prepared for a global pandemic, but to what extent do you believe that leaders should be properly prepared to manage chaos and disruption in general? And how prepared do you think the average leader is to manage this crisis situation?
Yeah, I want to, we talk about crisis, and before we know it, we talk about chaos. Now, there's actually a small portion of this crisis that's really chaotic. At the beginning, when we didn't know what was happening, we had to take really fast and decisive action. That's the moment that's really chaotic. And then strong leaders that make decisions rather faster than slower, rather not that greatly thought out, but at least keep making decisions. That's really important. That's the leading in chaos. The rest of the crisis, and almost like an innovation, is just very complex. And that requires a different type of leadership, if you will. Most leaders are struggling. This leading in chaos, we've got a couple of people that are really good at it, and we recognize them. Leading in complexity is about holding very difficult tensions, like a bold vision and short-term results, or stability and change, or honoring what works and the freedom to create the new. Now, these things, those are not problems to solve. They're polarities to manage, if you will. You need to transcend and include both. And that's where great leaders distinguish themselves from the good ones.
Mm-hmm. And actually, that brings me to the next question for Jessica. Innovation requires room to experiment, but during a financial crisis, and not to mention a global pandemic, there's not a lot of spare resources to go around. Do you continue experimenting and innovating in times of crisis, or is that sort of on hold for the time being?
Yeah, I think I think about, the balance. Finding ambidexterity in an organization is about balancing, efficiency and innovation. So it's balancing trying to minimize waste to become efficient, and making sure that there's slack to drive innovation. And I think about this through financial crunches. It's similar to your personal finances, I would say. That's the simplest example that I have. Even if times are tight, you might still try to put something aside for retirement. So this balancing ambidexterity is making sure you invest what you need to survive today, but also put aside what you need to survive in the future. And I think that if organizations thought about it that way on an organizational level, what are the things we're investing for the business to survive today, and still trying to put whatever you can aside to make sure that the business also survives tomorrow and driving innovation. I think that's a way of thinking about it, even when the resources are very, very tight.
Mm-hmm.
If I can add to that,
yes.
What I see a lot happening is we put innovation to the side, right? In the innovation department, we safeguard budget for it. But right now we have a lot of organizations, including mine and many others, that have to innovate. Like many of our courses were offline. Now we have to go online. That might seem not a big innovation. One of the telcos I'm serving, they couldn't go into other people's houses. So they had to think about completely new ways of installing all the stuff that needs to be installed. That is a ton of innovation, and it worked at a speed that it would have never been possible. So I also see this time almost forcing more innovation in your day-to-day activities in the places where normally we would say, well, maybe that's not for innovation right now.
Mm-hmm. I think that's interesting with that. Like the balancing between efficiency and innovation is dynamic, right? Like the more different the future is from the past, the more you need to balance towards innovation. The more similar the future is versus the past, the more you try to balance towards efficiency. And I think that right now, a lot of companies and organizations are seeing their current state and their future being quite different from what the past is for them, which means that, in my opinion, you should try to maybe even overinvest in innovation, even when times are tight.
Mm-hmm. I would have to agree. There's nothing like a crisis to spur innovation. Everyone knows, then there's a lot of research to back it up, that constraints actually enhance creativity. And we have one hell of a constraint facing all of our businesses right now. The only way through this, really, in many companies, including mine, is to innovate our way out of it, to be as creative as possible at finding new solutions that never occurred to us before, and put them in front of customers who are doing things in an entirely different way.
Mm-hmm. And so I like the optimism there, and I do hope that this does bring about a lot of positive change. I'm curious to know, it seems like a strong leadership today might be defined a little bit differently than it was maybe a year ago. I'm curious how, not just your own, but maybe the more public view of strong leadership is evolving with this crisis, and how we'll sort of feel about what it means to be a strong leader in the future after this is over. And I'm happy to open that up to anyone who wants to jump in.
One of the key attributes of mature leadership is that it be agile. The nature of your job as a leader changes constantly. It changes as the economy evolves. It changes as your company's fortunes evolve. It changes depending on the group of people or the person that you're leading. And this is a situation that definitely calls for that. I would say that how this is different from other cases, other situations in which leaders need to do the right thing, is that empathy is certainly a much more important factor. Your people are frightened. Your people are working under really difficult situations, not only apart from the office, but maybe holed up with their kids, and they're frightened for their job. They're frightened for the future of the company. So what people need is a leader that they believe is making the right decisions and believe cares about them personally.
Yeah, I mean, it must be tough as a leader right now. People look to you for answers, but it feels like nobody has all the answers right now. No one really knows what's just around the corner. How do you manage that? How do you sort of come to grips with being the person that people are looking to for answers when there aren't that many to share?
Yeah, I think that I want to come back to something that Mark said before. I think a lot of it's a difference between leading complicated situations and leading complex situations, right? In complicated situations, like you can solve the problem. You can usually get a group of experts together, put some rules into place, and you can solve a complicated issue. In complex situations, it's often about managing the situation. It's not about having all the answers, but you need to find a way to manage the situation and make sure that people feel that you're managing the situation. And to me, that isn't always about having all the answers, but it's showing that you're managing the situation in a way that people feel comfortable with and makes people feel trust. And I think that, that is as often that people feel heard, people feel listened to, people feel that you care about them just as much as your ability as a leader to solve the specific problems that they have. So I think to me, there's a fundamentally different there. And I think that, this is also where I see that innovation and leadership happening. Leaders not necessarily being the person that has all the answers, but being good at managing complex situations.
Mm-hmm. And you spoke a little bit about empathy and connecting with staff on a deeper level right now to sort of help them manage through the crisis. At the same time, though, everyone is working remotely, and that's a new challenge that a lot of leaders are facing. How do you ensure that you're demonstrating that sort of empathy and you're able to be there for the people that you lead when you can't physically be around them?
Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, so I noticed that you start shifting a lot of things. So, for example, I mean, a lot of meetings we used to do in person, and a lot of things we used to solve in person. And before you know it, you start doing that on Zoom or whatever. But now it's really about shifting part of the task to asynchronous rather than always doing it synchronous. So you have a lot more action going on in the background, and you create separate time to really check in. So we check in a lot with our folks, like every week, we have multiple moments where we communicate and we repeat. And we take the time to have that human connection, to really check in with each other. So I think it's also shifting modalities. That requires different skills as well, right? If you work asynchronous, all of a sudden people have to be really good and really concise in writing assignments to each other, which is something that younger generations are much better at growing up with tweeting than maybe my generation who never had that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually saw some research, Mark, that connected frequency of communication with perception and leadership when it comes to virtual teams. So, which is not actually what research has seen in face-to-face kind of situations, but frequency of communication matters when you're virtual, and it's connected to perception of leadership, which I find really interesting. The other thing that I think is really important to me is that remember when technology is put between humans in our communication, technology becomes a social actor, which means that there's actually the introduction of something that is usually referred to as systems trustworthiness. So as I try to build trust with one of my coworkers, now we have a layer of technology in between ourselves that we need to consider if it's trust building or trust breaking. And I think that this is something I would want to give the advice to all of the leaders who are now trying to adopt to virtual leadership. Don't forget about the technology layer that is now sitting in between humans that we need to also learn to trust, or we will distrust it. And I take online banking as an example of this. It took a while before people have built up systems trust to online banking. And the same thing is true for the communication technologies or the systems that we put between us now as we try to build that relationship in virtual work.
I would agree with Jess about the frequency of contact. The CEOs that I've been talking to at Inc. and Fast Company have multiplied the number of contacts they have with their team. There are daily calls, daily emails, and often the topic of discussion is not just how are you doing against your goals, but just how are you?
Mm-hmm. Now we just have about a little over a minute left, and in that time I wanted to ask, right now people have a lot of spare time on their hands, time to read a book, get into a new podcast, whatever it may be. I'm wondering if you can share some recommendations as strong leaders yourself, any books, podcasts, any sort of media that really helped shape your leadership style, anything that you think the leaders out in the audience today who have got lots of time on their hands could benefit from. Anybody?
I personally, I can't handle anything more challenging than rom-coms right now. So
okay,
I'd give you a long list of those, but you can choose them yourselves. But it's the genre that matters.
All right, you get a favorite?
So to balance, Eric, then I say that if you have more time than usual on your hands, if that's true for you, then I would say that it's an excellent time to dig into actual academic research. I think often, I feel that podcasts and business books and things like that are good, but often it refers back to someone that has experience from working in one or two companies, and it might not actually apply to your organization. So I always find when I have a little bit of extra time on my hands, I like to read academic research, and there's tons of good stuff out there around e-leadership and virtual leadership and all those things that comes from big cohorts of organizations and virtual workers and companies that is worth looking into.
All right. And Mark?
I don't think leaders don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. So if you have time on your hands, reflect more. Start journaling, do a meditative practice, whatever it is that works for you, but reflect more.
Mm-hmm.
Rom-coms work for me.
I wanted to know what's your favorite one, or what's keeping you going right now?
This Is Us.
Oh,
TV series in the
okay.
US.
That's a real tearjerker. All right. Thank you all so much for your time. We've run out of time now, but I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.